Challenging the scriptural claims about Jesus involves examining historical, textual, and interpretative evidence. Skeptics often raise these points to question the validity of Scripture's depiction of Jesus' divinity, fulfillment of prophecy, and role as the Messiah. 1. Historical challenges. Lack of contemporary accounts. Critics argue that there are no direct, contemporary, first-century non-Christian accounts of Jesus' life, miracles, or resurrection. Historical records from figures like Tacitus or Josephus are often cited, but were written decades later and may reflect second-hand information. Bias of Gospel authors. Skeptics claim the Gospel writers were motivated by religious zeal, which could have influenced their presentation of Jesus as fulfilling Old Testament prophecies. 2. Textual challenges. Gospel variations. Differences in the Gospel accounts, such as discrepancies in the genealogies of Jesus, Matthew 1:1-17 versus Luke 3:23-38, are cited as evidence of inconsistency in Scripture. Late composition. Some skeptics argue that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus' death, allowing time for legends to develop, and question whether they accurately reflect the historical Jesus. 3. Interpretation of prophecies. Out of context. Critics argue that many Old Testament prophecies cited as evidence for Jesus' identity were taken out of context. For example, Isaiah 7:14, virgin birth. The Hebrew word translated as virgin, Alma, can also mean young woman, leading some to question whether this prophecy was intended to predict a miraculous birth. Psalm 22, crucifixion. Some contend that this passage describes the suffering of King David and was not meant as a messianic prophecy. Selective fulfillment. Skeptics point out that while some prophecies align with Jesus' life, others remain unfulfilled or were interpreted symbolically, e.g., the establishment of a physical kingdom in messianic prophecies. 4. Challenges to miraculous claims. Lack of scientific evidence. Miracles such as Jesus walking on water or raising Lazarus are often dismissed as unscientific or as allegorical storytelling rather than historical events. Resurrection. Skepticism. The resurrection is central to Jesus' divinity, but is often challenged as lacking concrete evidence. Alternate explanations include the theft of Jesus' body, hallucinations among his followers, or symbolic rather than literal resurrection. 5. Cultural and religious counterclaims. Jewish rejection. Many Jewish scholars argue that Jesus did not fulfill key messianic expectations, such as bringing world peace, Isaiah 2:4, or rebuilding the temple, Ezekiel 37:26-28. They view the Messianic age as a future event, not fulfilled in Jesus' time. Islamic perspective. The Quran acknowledges Jesus as a prophet and messenger, but denies his divinity or that he was crucified. Quran 4:157-158, offering a competing narrative. 6. Historical criticism of fulfilled prophecy. Retroactive fitting. Critics suggest that New Testament authors retroactively shaped narratives to align with Old Testament prophecies. For example, Matthew 2:14-15 portrays Jesus' family fleeing to Egypt to fulfill Hosea 11:1, but skeptics argue this prophecy referred to Israel, not the Messiah. Lack of independent verification. Events like the virgin birth or the Bethlehem census are difficult to corroborate with external historical evidence. 7. Theological objections. Trinity doctrine. Complexity. The concept of Jesus as both fully God and fully human is seen by some as a later theological development not clearly outlined in early Scripture. Jesus' own statements. Skeptics point to verses like Mark 10:18, where Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good, except God alone," to suggest Jesus did not explicitly claim divinity. Addressing the challenges. Believers often respond to these objections with counter-arguments. Historical corroboration. While direct evidence may be sparse, they cite the rapid growth of Christianity and early martyrdom of the apostles as indirect evidence of Jesus' resurrection. Prophetic layers. Prophecies are interpreted as having dual fulfillments, immediate and ultimate, pointing to Jesus as the culmination. Faith perspective. For many, the evidence for Jesus' divinity aligns with spiritual conviction and personal experience, which transcends purely historical scrutiny. While these challenges exist, they are part of ongoing debates in theology, history, and textual criticism. Each perspective, skeptical or faithful, depends on interpretive frameworks, underlying assumptions, and the weight given to historical and spiritual evidence.